The observation station floated in the dark space behind Earth's moon, invisible to the primitive sensors below. Inside, Thalvrax adjusted his viewing screen and watched the small blue planet rotate slowly. He had been watching for almost 300 years now, and he never grew tired of it. The archivists were the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been studying other races for 10,000 years, carefully documenting how civilizations grew and changed. They never interfered. They never made contact. They simply watched and learned and wrote everything down in their vast libraries. Thalvrax was proud of his work. Humanity had been his life's project, assigned to him when the archivists first discovered Earth in what the humans called the 1400s. Back then, the humans had been fighting with swords and riding horses. Now they had machines that could fly and weapons that could destroy entire cities. It was fascinating to watch. He pulled up his latest report on his screen. The document was enormous, thousands of pages filled with observations and measurements and predictions. Every aspect of human life had been studied. Their biology was documented down to the smallest cell. Their psychology had been mapped and analyzed. Their wars, their art, their religions, their science, everything was recorded. The humans were weak creatures by galactic standards. They lived less than 100 years. Their bodies were fragile, easily broken by disease or injury. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They couldn't even see very well in the dark. By all measures, they should have been prey animals, not the dominant species on their planet, but they were clever. That was the key to their success. They made tools, better tools than most species developed. They worked together in large groups, building cities and nations. They were curious about everything, always asking questions and looking for answers. They had emotions that ran deep: love, anger, fear. Joy, and these emotions drove them to do remarkable things. Thalvrax had watched them split the atom. He had observed their first steps into space. He had documented their slow, painful progress toward a unified world government. It was all very predictable. The archivists had seen this pattern 847 times before with other species. He typed his final conclusion into the report. Humanity would develop faster than light travel within the next 100 years. They would then expand into nearby star systems, make contact with other races, and eventually join the galactic community as a minor member. They would trade, share knowledge, and settle into their place in the cosmic order. They posed no threat to anyone. The report was accepted immediately by the Archivist Council. Thalvrax received commendations for his thorough work. His study of humanity was considered one of the finest examples of xenanthropology ever produced. Other researchers used it as a teaching tool for new observers, but there was something Thalvrax had missed. Something hidden in all the data he had collected, invisible in plain sight. He had watched humans mourn their dead. He had seen them build monuments to lost loved ones. He had observed their funeral rituals, their graves, their memorials. He had documented how humans told stories about ancestors they had never met, people who had died centuries ago. He had noted how they visited these graves year after year, leaving flowers and speaking to stones. He thought he understood. Many species honored their dead. It was a common behavior, a way to process grief and maintain social bonds. The archivists did it themselves in their own way. There was nothing unusual about it. What Thalvrax failed to understand was what that remembering meant to humans. He saw the ritual but missed the weight behind it. He observed the behavior but didn't grasp the promise that lay beneath. Humans didn't just remember the dead. They carried them. Every human alive held inside themselves the accumulated weight of every ancestor's unfinished business, every wrong that hadn't been righted, every debt that hadn't been paid. When a human made a promise to someone who had died, that promise became sacred. It became something that transcended logic, calculation, or self-preservation. The archivists had studied human persistence. They had excellent records of it. They knew humans could work on a single problem for decades. They had watched scientists spend entire lifetimes pursuing one question. They had seen artists perfect their craft over 50 years. They had observed humans climb mountains, cross oceans, and endure incredible hardships to achieve their goals. But they had only seen humans persist at human goals. Within human contexts, competing with other humans or against nature. They had never seen what happened when a human decided to persist against something outside their world. They had never witnessed what human stubbornness looked like when it was aimed at the galaxy itself. Felvrex filed his report and began preparing for the next phase. Soon, humanity would develop the technology they needed to leave their solar system. When that happened, the archivists would finally make contact. They would welcome humanity to the galactic community, share their knowledge, and begin the process of integration. It would all go smoothly. The archivists had done this 847 times before. They knew exactly what to expect. On Earth below, humans went about their lives, unaware they were being watched. They went to work, raised their children, fought their wars, and built their dreams. They visited graves and told stories about the dead. They made promises and kept them. They remembered, and in that remembering, in that refusal to forget, lay something the archivists had never truly understood. Something that would change everything. The day finally came in the year 2187. A human ship flickered into existence at the edge of their solar system, moving faster than light. The test was crude, barely controlled, but it worked. Humanity had done it. Felvrex watched the celebration on Earth with satisfaction. Everything was happening exactly as predicted. He sent a message to the Archivist Council, and they approved first contact immediately. After 300 years of watching, it was time to introduce themselves. Ambassador Skala Keshtin was chosen to lead the delegation. She was experienced, having successfully contacted 43 species before. She knew all the protocols, all the possible reactions, all the ways to calm a frightened species and welcome them into the larger galaxy. The archivist ship uncloaked over Earth on a bright Tuesday morning. They made sure every human could see it, a massive vessel that dwarfed anything humanity had built. It was meant to inspire awe, not fear. They broadcast messages in every human language, explaining who they were and why they had come. The human response was perfectly normal. Governments panicked briefly, then reached out cautiously. Military forces mobilized but didn't attack. Scientists were excited. Religious leaders interpreted the event in various ways. Within a week, official talks had begun. Keshtin met with human leaders in Geneva. She brought gifts of technology, medical advances that could cure diseases, energy systems that could end poverty, knowledge that would leap humanity forward by centuries. In return, she asked only that humans share their own culture and join the Galactic Archive as members. The humans were overwhelmed but eager. They asked 1,000 questions. They wanted to know everything about other species, other worlds, the structure of galactic society. Keshtin answered patiently, enjoying their enthusiasm. Humans were delightful, really. So curious, so energetic, so hopeful. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges were planned. Human scientists began working with archivist researchers. Everything was going smoothly, better than expected. The archivists congratulated themselves on another successful integration. Then, 4 months after first contact, the accident happened. A cargo ship belonging to the archivists was delivering supplies to their research station near Jupiter. The pilot, a young archivist named Velmuth, was tired. He had been flying for 16 hours straight, which violated rest protocols, but he wanted to finish his route and return home. His attention wavered for just a moment. He didn't see the human mining station in the asteroid belt. By the time his sensors registered it, it was too late. The cargo ship, moving at tremendous speed, clipped the station's main habitat ring. The impact tore the station apart. 43 human miners died. They didn't die quickly. The station lost pressure slowly, giving them time to send final messages to their families, time to understand what was happening to them. By the time rescue ships arrived, everyone aboard was gone. The news hit Earth like a physical blow. 43 people dead because an alien pilot made a mistake. The first human deaths caused by another species. The first time humanity had lost their own to someone from beyond their world. Thalvrax immediately activated the Archivist incident protocols. They had handled situations like this 127 times before with other species. The process was well established and fared. First, a formal apology. Keshtin appeared on every human broadcast network, expressing deep regret for the accident. She explained that Velmoth had made an error, that he was devastated by what happened, that the Archivist took full responsibility. Second, compensation. The Archivists calculated the value of the lost lives and infrastructure using their standard formulas. They considered the miners' expected lifetime earnings, the cost of rebuilding the station, the economic impact on the families, and emotional damages. They multiplied the total by 10, which was their policy for fatal accidents. The sum offered was staggering. Enough money to make every family wealthy for generations. Enough to build 10 new mining stations. The Archivists also offered free grief counseling, educational opportunities for the deceased miners' children, and guaranteed jobs for any family members who wanted them. Third, systematic correction. The Archivists reviewed all their piloting protocols, installed new safety systems on every cargo ship, and implemented mandatory rest periods. They published a full report on the accident and the steps taken to prevent future incidents. The human governments accepted the terms. Officials signed the agreements. The money was transferred. From the Archivist perspective, the matter was resolved. Justice had been served in the way it always was, through acknowledgement, compensation, and prevention. But then, the families of the 43 miners held a press conference. They stood together, parents and spouses and children and siblings, and they rejected the compensation. They didn't want money. They wanted something the Archivists had never encountered before. They wanted Velmoth to stand trial for negligent homicide under human law. Keshtin was confused. She met with the families, trying to understand. Velmoth had made a mistake. Yes, but it was an accident. He hadn't intended to harm anyone. The Archivists had already taken responsibility as a species. They had compensated everyone involved. What purpose would putting Velmoth on trial serve? The humans tried to explain. One person's mistake had killed 43 people. That person needed to face justice. Not as a species, not as an organization, but as an individual. He needed to stand before the families, look them in the eye, and answer for what he had done. Keshtin consulted with the Archivist Council. They reviewed their records on 847 species. Not one of them had ever demanded individual accountability like this. Justice, across the galaxy, was collective. When one member of a species caused harm, the species made it right as a whole. The idea of punishing a single individual for an accident was foreign, almost primitive. The Council decided to refuse. Velmoth would not be extradited to Earth. The compensation was fair, more than fair. The matter was closed. They thought that would be the end of it. They had no idea what they had just started. 2 weeks after the Archivists refused to hand over Velmoth, 12 humans bought a ship. They were family members of the dead miners. Parents who had lost children. A husband who had lost his wife. A sister who had lost her brother. They pooled the compensation money the archivists had given them and purchased the best human vessel they could afford. They called themselves the 43, and they declared their intention publicly. They were going to find Velmoth. They were going to bring him back to Earth. They were going to make sure he faced justice for what he had done. The archivists monitored the announcement with mild interest. 12 humans in one small ship? It was a futile gesture, emotional but pointless. Velmoth was currently stationed at an archivist facility 7 star systems away. He was protected by security forces, advanced technology, and the full authority of the oldest civilization in the galaxy. These 12 humans had no legal standing, no authority, and no realistic chance of success. Thelvrax added a note to his files about this revenge quest as an interesting example of human emotional response to grief. He expected the 43 to give up within a few months, when the reality of their situation became clear. The 43 left Earth orbit and jumped to the nearest trading station. There, they did something unexpected. They started recruiting. They didn't just look for other grieving families. They looked for anyone who believed in what they were doing. Engineers joined them, angry that an alien pilot had killed their colleagues. Lawyers came aboard, believing in the principle of individual accountability. Soldiers signed up, looking for a purpose after returning from various conflicts. Teachers, doctors, mechanics, and pilots volunteered. Some believed in the cause. Others just wanted to see if 12 humans could really challenge an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. Within 3 months, the 43 had grown to 300 people, operating 5 ships. Within 6 months, they had 2,000 volunteers and a fleet of 20 vessels. They set up recruitment stations on human colonies, accepting anyone who passed their training and agreed to their mission. The archivists stopped being amused. Cashtain sent messages asking the 43 to stop. She explained that they were violating multiple treaties and galactic laws. She warned them that their actions could damage Earth's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. She offered to reopen negotiations about Velmoth if they would just stand down. The 43 sent back a simple response. They would stop when Velmoth stood trial on Earth, not before. They began tracking him. The archivists had never dealt with this kind of pursuit before. Usually, if someone wanted to find someone else, they went through proper channels and official requests. The 43 didn't bother with channels. They hacked databases, bribed information brokers, and interrogated anyone who might know where Velmoth was stationed. They were relentless. When archivist security blocked their access to official records, they bought the information from smugglers. When the smugglers refused to talk, they found other ways. They learned how to crack archivist encryption by studying captured equipment. They mapped archivist communication networks by monitoring traffic patterns. They became experts in alien technology through sheer determination. The archivists moved Velmoth to a different facility, hoping to throw off the pursuit. The 43 found him within 2 weeks. They moved him again. The 43 tracked him down in 10 days. No matter where the archivists sent him, the 43 were always just behind, learning, adapting, getting closer. Other species began to notice. Traders talked about the humans who couldn't be stopped. Pirates started avoiding the 43 after a few bloody encounters. Even other galactic powers watched with interest. No one had ever seen anything like this before, a small group pursuing a single individual across multiple star systems, refusing to give up no matter what obstacles were placed in their path. The archivists tried having the 43 arrested. They contacted local authorities and various systems, claiming the humans were criminals and terrorists. Some places agreed and tried to capture them. The 43 fought their way out every time. They weren't warriors by training, but they fought like people who had made a promise to the dead and would rather die than break it. A monitor Battle on a trading station near the Cronus cluster became legendary. 50 security forces tried to arrest 20 members of the 43 who were gathering supplies. The humans had inferior weapons and no military training. But they didn't fight like soldiers following orders. They fought like people who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. When their ship was disabled, they stole escape pods. When they ran out of ammunition, they used tools as weapons. When they were cornered, they found ways through walls and floors that security forces didn't think possible. By the end, 12 of the 20 humans had escaped, and the security forces had learned a valuable lesson. Humans don't fight by the rules. They fight to win. 3 years passed. The 43 now numbered over 5,000 volunteers, operating from a fleet of 75 ships. They had become something between a military force and a religious movement. New members took oaths, swearing to honor the 43 miners who had died. They wore uniforms marked with the names of the dead. They sang songs about justice and remembrance. The galaxy watched. Some species admired their determination. Others thought they were insane. But everyone agreed on one thing: humans were different. No other species would have kept going for 3 years on a mission that had no realistic chance of success. Thelvrax reviewed his files on humanity with growing unease. He had missed something fundamental. He went back through 300 years of observations, looking for the answer. And then he found it. Hidden in all his documentation about human memory, human grief, human persistence. He had observed the behavior, but failed to understand what it meant. Humans didn't just remember their dead. They carried them forward. Every promise made to someone who had died became sacred, eternal, unbreakable. He sent an urgent message to the council. They needed to understand what they were facing. This wasn't going to stop. The 43 would never give up. They would chase Velmoth forever if they had to, and more humans would join them with each passing year. The council reviewed his message and dismissed it. 5,000 humans against the might of the Archivist Empire? It was still futile. They would continue as planned, keeping Velmoth safe and waiting for the humans to eventually realize they couldn't win. But Thelvrax knew better now. He had finally understood what 300 years of study had failed to teach him. Humans don't stop. They don't calculate odds and surrender when the numbers are bad. They make promises to their dead, and those promises become more important than their own lives. The 43 were coming, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop them. The 43 finally cornered Velmoth on a remote archive station orbiting a dying red star. The station was old, one of the first the Archivists had ever built, filled with ancient records and staffed by only 200 researchers. The Archivists had thought it was the perfect hiding place. No one went there anymore. It was forgotten, peaceful, safe. They were wrong. When the 43's fleet appeared at the edge of the system, alarms rang across the galaxy. The Archivists had been preparing for this moment for months. They knew eventually the humans would find Velmoth again, and they had decided this time would be different. This time they would make a stand, not to protect one pilot who had made a mistake. That wasn't why they mobilized their full defensive fleet. They did it because they finally understood what was at stake. If they let 12 humans force the oldest civilization in the galaxy to surrender, if they showed that determination alone could override law and order and 10,000 years of established protocol, everything would change. Other species would see. Other groups would try. The careful balance of galactic society would shatter. So they sent everything. 300 warships, the largest fleet the Archivists had assembled in 2,000 years. They surrounded the archive station and sent a message to the 43. Turn back now or be destroyed. This was their final warning. The humans didn't turn back. They never even considered it. They had made a promise 3 years ago to 43 people who had died in the dark of space. who had sent final messages to families they would never see again. That promise was more real to them than the 300 warships filling their view screens. The battle began at dawn, station time. The 43 didn't have better weapons than the archivists. Their ships weren't faster or stronger. Their shields weren't more advanced. They had only one advantage, and it wasn't something that could be measured or quantified. They had the absolute certainty that they were right. And that certainty made them impossible to stop. The first wave of human ships pushed through the archivist defensive line using tactics that made no tactical sense. They sacrificed their own vessels to create openings for others. They rammed archivist ships when they ran out of ammunition. They kept coming even when their shields failed and their hulls breached and their crews died in the vacuum of space. Thought the archivists had superior numbers and technology. But they had never fought anyone who fought like this. Their tactics were designed for rational opponents who retreated when defeat was certain. The humans didn't retreat. When their ships were disabled, they used escape pods to continue the assault. When their weapons ran out, they improvised. When barriers were erected, they found ways around them or simply waited, patient and immovable as mountains. 6 hours into the battle, the 43's flagship was destroyed. 3,000 humans died in the explosion. The remaining ships didn't pause to mourn. They pressed forward, pushing closer to the station, fighting with increased intensity as if the deaths had only made them stronger. Thalvrax watched from orbit, his 300 years of research finally making horrible sense. He had documented human persistence in science, art, exploration, and war. But he had always seen it in contexts where humans were working toward something they wanted to achieve. He had never understood what human persistence meant when it wasn't about achievement at all. When it was about keeping a promise to the dead. Every human who died made the 43 stronger, not weaker. Because now they were fighting for those people too. The debt grew with each loss, and the survivors would carry it forward no matter how long it took. He opened the communication channel to the Archivist Council. They had to stop this. Not because the humans were winning, they weren't, not in any military sense. The Archivists could destroy every human ship here and barely notice the cost. But that wasn't the point. The point was that even after being destroyed, even after losing, the humans would just come back. More of them. Again and again. Forever. The council refused to listen. The battle was almost over. The humans were down to their last 30 ships. Victory was minutes away. The Thalvrax understood something the council didn't. There were billions of humans back on Earth and the colonies. If the 43 died here, others would take their place. The 43 would become martyrs, and the mission would continue. It would never end. Not in 10 years, not in 100, not in 1,000. Humans would keep coming until Velmuth faced justice. Even if it took generations, he had finally found the variable he had missed. The thing that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. They were the only ones who made their promises to the past as sacred as promises to the future. They didn't just move forward. They carried everything behind them, all the weight of all their dead. And they would not rest until every debt was paid. Thalvrax made a decision. He overrode the council's authority, something he had never done in 400 years of service. He ordered the Archivist fleet to stand down. He contacted the remaining human ships directly and told them he was bringing Velmuth out. The fighting stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 Archivist warships hung motionless in space, waiting to see if their chief researcher had just committed treason or prevented a forever war. Velmuth was brought to a transport shuttle. He looked small and frightened. This young pilot who had made one mistake and accidentally triggered something no one in the galaxy had seen before. He was handed over to the 43 without ceremony or condition. The human ships turned and left, carrying their prize back to Earth. They didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They had simply done what they promised 3 years ago, and now the promise was kept. The galactic community was shocked. The archivists, the oldest and most powerful civilization in known space, had surrendered to 5,000 humans in 75 ships. The precedent was established. The implications would ripple outward for centuries. Thalvrax filed his final report on humanity. It was short, just 1 paragraph, but it was transmitted to every species in the galaxy. Humanity's deadliest trait is not their intelligence, their tool use, or their capacity for violence. It is their inability to forget. They remember their dead across generations, and they will pursue justice for those dead until the stars grow cold. Do not harm them. Do not underestimate them. Above all, understand this. If you wrong one human, you wrong them all forever. They will remember. They will come. They will never, ever stop. Velmoth stood trial on Earth. He was found guilty of negligent homicide and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The families of the 43 miners attended every day of the trial. When it was over, they finally accepted the compensation the archivists had offered years before. Not because they wanted the money, but because the promise was fulfilled. The 43 disbanded quietly. They had never wanted to be warriors or heroes. They had just wanted justice for people they loved. Now that they had it, they went home to their lives and families. But the galaxy never forgot them. And neither did humanity, because humans never do.